in Turin and Florence. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So in basically this intervention, as you, Martin, mentioned, it was implemented under Project FAIR, short for Fighting Against Inmates Radicalization. In my presentation, I'll provide just a very brief overview of this project. Then I will elaborate on the actual pilot intervention that we conducted with youth in conflict with the law. And by that, I mean youth who were sentenced for criminal offenses not related to terrorism. So we're really focusing on prevention. Last part of my presentation, I will present to you the lessons learned from this experience. Next slide, please. Project FAIR was funded by the EU Justice Programme, and the reason it's a very interesting program because it actually brings about 10 different civil society organizations across Europe who came together in 2017 to try to address this issue of violent extreme radicalization in prisons. So the idea of preventing that, but also supporting the rehabilitation and management of convicted terrorist offenders. This consortium was actually headed by Fondazione Nuovo Villaggio del Fanciullo, which is based in Ravenna here in Italy, with the support of scientific coordinator Berardinelli and Guglielminetti. There were, as I mentioned, since it was actually implemented over 10 different European countries, different civil society organizations, and that was in the Netherlands, Finland, Malta, Slovenia, Lithuania, Hungary, Romania, and Portugal. Next slide, please. This civil society organization based here in Italy, Fondazione Nuovo Villaggio, has been increasingly responsible for supporting alternatives to detention, and it actually houses a residential center for addiction treatment for persons undergoing drug addiction treatment through court order. So they provide vocational training, rehabilitation services, also like providing services supporting youth to engage into job placement activities like beekeeping and agricultural cooperatives. Next slide, please. This PVE intervention that was undertaken in prison settings did not actually happen in a vacuum. The project provided different services, one of which was actually a manual on PVE and for the management of terrorist offenders. Second, it really focused on the capacity building of prison operators by assessing their needs and tailoring capacity building interventions for them. This manual and other deliverables, including also a feasibility study for an alternative to detention measures for terrorist offenders in Europe, can be found on the website, FAIR website, that I will be sharing with you at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. I'm actually excited now to be sharing with you the actual pilot intervention that we implemented. So by we, I mean it was a team of Luca Guglielminetti, the scientific coordinator of the project, myself, and a social worker. And probably the most important question would be, why juvenile detention centers? Actually, one reason being accessibility. As a civil society organization in Italy, it was actually quite difficult for us to receive access to adult prisons, specifically to terrorist offenders, as they are housed in different detention centers. However, through the Department of Juvenile Justice, we were able to access these centers and provide this intervention. The second reason was actually that we were very much interested in reaching out to youth, and specifically youth in conflict with the law. As you're aware, this is a stage in life where people are trying to explore their identities, and being in conflict with the law, being in close contact with the criminal justice system can be quite problematic. So it is a period where it's also very easy to be targeted by ideologues, by gang members, and who try actually to distort youth grievances and attract them towards violent extremist ideologies. So this is why we actually were very much interested in reaching to youth. In terms of inclusion and exclusion criteria, it was actually the prison management together with the social workers who identified and selected the youth. Based on our exclusion criteria, which is avoiding work, we did not work with youth with long sentences and youth with severe psychiatric disorder as assessed by the prison psychiatrist. Of course, the intervention was completely voluntary, and youth could leave this intervention anytime they wanted. For the intervention, it was implemented in 2 juvenile detention centers in Turin and Florence. And out of the 12 youth we reached, 7 completed the entire basically intervention. And this is a challenge we faced, was the high turnover. In terms of methodology, it was divided, let's say, in 3 parts. One was an encounter with Valeria Culina. Valeria is the mother of Yusuf Zaghba. I am a person of 22 years old who when he was 22, he actually was involved in the 2017 London Bridge attack. Yusuf, together with other 2, they actually they drove a van into pedestrian, killing 8 people, and including also Yusuf. He was one of the youth. He was actually involved and killed by the police during the attack. So during this encounter with Valeria Culina, as a mother and who actually, her son was involved in a terrorist attack and who was actually killed during this attack, she discusses and she tells youth her story, which is a very difficult story, but she tells actually also the journey of radicalization of Yusuf, with his father being quite violent when he was young, but also being Moroccan Italian, the difficulties he faced, wanting to be a good Muslim in one hand, but also wanting to embrace Western values. And at some point, actually, Yusuf, he tries to go to Syria to join ISIS. And he is stopped by border police, Italian border police, as they found out that he has a one-way ticket. And he explains to his mother that the reason he wanted to go to reach ISIS, because for them, following rules would have made his life way easier, because he would not be constantly confused regarding how to live his life, but this way it would have been easier for him. So there is this encounter, which is very, very emotional. And then there is a series of sessions, which they total an average of 20 hours that me and my team, we spend with these youth. And we basically support them through cognitive behavioral techniques to explore their values, but also their objectives and their dreams in lives, to help them basically reconstruct an identity outside the criminal justice system. The third part of the intervention is this restitution, in which basically the youth, they tell it is their turn to tell their own stories to Valeria Culina and a group of other volunteers, and share their narrative also through creative expression. Next slide, please. I'm sure you probably have many questions. If you do, please write in the Q&A and I will be happy to answer. This is what you see in front of you is the list of CBT intervention that we undertook with the youth. So at the beginning, it's very, very straightforward, quite simple actually, these interventions are. Method that we use just to break the ice and create rapport. So we ask them to choose a word to describe themselves. What kind of qualities does that word entail, etc. But then we spend quite some time discussing values. So we ask them to elaborate on important values that they have, what these values mean to them, and how does it mean to them to live in line with these values and honor these values. Like, I'll give you an example. Many of you, these youth actually indicated that family is a very important value. So we asked them, of course, what does family mean to you? And then we asked them, so how does it mean for you to live in, to honor that value, to be close to your family, to support, what does it mean to you? So it was really getting in touch with these kind, a part of themselves. The second part we actually spent quite some time on was the goal and personal objectives. We asked them to imagine a big dream, but we actually were very concrete in asking them to categorize their personal objectives in terms of family, friends, mental health, physical health, education, hobbies, spirituality, and to think what kind of changes they would like to see, and to divide that into short-term and long-term goals, and help them basically develop a personal work plan for these, to reach these goals. Like an example could be if, for instance, for family, in the next 6 months, I want to be able to write a letter to my brother telling him about the story, or call my father. So these kind of very, very concrete behaviors at the short term and at the long term. Afterwards, while we worked on these exercises, we actually really supported and encouraged creative expression. So we suggested various methods, including designing a vision board, a collage. So actually during the sessions, we would cut out images from magazine that represent their values, or the word that describes themselves, to do like a poster of this, basically their project. That was their personal project. Other times we also suggested, and some of them did that, journaling. One of the youth actually wrote poetry, and another one actually composed and wrote a rap song, which was very nice. And like I mentioned, then there was this restitution with Valeria Culina, and also these youth, and also the prison manager, at least in one of the detention centers, who actually were able to share their stories. Next slide, please. This is the vision board of, we will call him Ahmed. He's actually Egyptian. And he was arrested and convicted in Italy for actually quite a petty crime. However, because of anger management issues that he had, and episodes of violence against some of the inmates, his sentence was actually prolonged for 3 years. And when we met Ahmed, he was about to be released. And as you can see, one of the lion, that's actually the one word he described himself was like, I'm a lion. And you'll see an image of a family, and that is one of his goals, was actually to be able to support financially his family in Egypt. So when we asked him how, and made it very concrete in terms of goal-oriented approach, he wanted to improve his Italian, he wanted to work as a bartender and be able to send money to his family. So we actually, through this little work plan of just learning it, improving Italian, and working as a bartender after release, we actually worked with a social worker and the probation officer to help him with this plan. You will see also something crossed out. These were the barriers towards his journey, and they are drug use, heavy drinking, self-mutilation, and tattooing. These were either behaviors that would be a problem, and also symptoms of him not being, of lack of well-being. So we also worked with support system. We tried to identify, okay, if this, in case you have these kind of problems or symptoms or difficulties, who can you reach out to, and who is your safe circle, whether in prison or outside of prison. And next slide, please. This intervention was evaluated by an external NGO through key interviews and questionnaires, and it looked into the relevance, effectiveness, sustainability of the intervention. And actually the prison operators and the social workers who were interviewed, they did mention that they observed a different, like a change in behavior from the youth that we met. And as you can read from the slide, the actual questionnaires we did with the youth indicated that they felt valued, involved, heard, and they were able to find dignity in their life stories, as well as ability and courage to reframe these experiences. And we believe that this is the entire point of prevention of violent extremism is trying to look into this personal grievances, the unbelief systems. Next slide, please. In terms of lessons learned and recommendations, monitoring and evaluation, one thing we did not do, and it should be done in any PVE intervention, and we need to look into that into the future, is having a needs assessment for factors of risk and resilience towards PVE, not just for youth in conflict with the law, but also very specific to the prison, the prison that you're going, because we noticed that going to different prisons, they have different subcultures related also to the youth, but different dynamics that happen. So it's very important to assess what are the factors that make these youth particularly resilient, and what are the factors of, let's say, risk. One thing we're quite proud of are actually the tools and materials we used. And I mean by that, the CBT exercises we did, that we felt they were actually, and also as mentioned by the youth, they were culturally and linguistically appropriate. In fact, many of the youth we met were not Italian. Many had Chinese heritage, Arab heritage. Many of them had very poor Italian. So we had the materials we used we made sure that they understood them, but we made sure they were culturally appropriate, and that, for instance, the creative expression, it was very much, they chose what kind of creative expression and method to use, and that the tools were very also linguistically, let's say, simple. The approach we used and we recommend, it was very holistic and multidisciplinary. In fact, us as facilitators, we also worked quite closely with the prison, with their teacher, and also with the social workers, the prison administration. So having this cooperation actually also increases the trust between prison administration and civil society organization, which is very much needed. It's important to provide different interventions to youth when it comes to prevention, in order to tailor and respond to the different needs of youth. Capacity building of prison operators, we did that, and we found it very helpful, because then prison operators, they can actually, and by that I mean even the management, they can help and support and encourage such interventions. Finally, the need for a PVE national action plan. Unfortunately, here in Italy, there is no national PVE action plan. There is a proposed law, D'Ambrosio Manciulli, however, which has been proposed in Parliament more than once, but it has not been endorsed. And such a plan would be important to institutionalize such rehabilitation interventions across different prisons, and also across the different, just like Dennis mentioned in his presentation, across different stages as well of the criminal justice process. Next slide, please. Thank you. The final outcome of this project with this final conference last year in Rome were actually like I mentioned, this consortium of NGOs. We met together, and we actually discussed and agreed on 10 overall recommendations for PVE interventions in prison settings. And this was actually presented to the Italian Senate. These recommendations and other guidelines I mentioned in my presentation can be found in the FAIR website. Next slide, please. Thank you. These are the contacts in case you need to reach and have more information, and also the FAIR webpage, which I recommend that you check it out for also other publications that we developed under this project. Thank you very much.
Well,